Hello everyone, so today I am here to do a video that I have been planning on doing for so long, but I never made it. So today we're going to be talking about all of the different ways that I learned languages. This is a question that I get asked pretty often in real life as well as online, just because I do know quite a few languages and a lot of people just kind of are like, how did you do that? And then I have a very long-winded response, and now I'm kind of like, I'm just gonna make a video about it because then I can kind of talk and discuss and chat and ramble. So I am proficient to advanced in I'd say 3 languages besides my native language, and then I'm a beginner in 2, but like one of those is from like my childhood, so I've kind of just given up on it. Like I really don't care about relearning it or anything, but besides English, which is my native language, I'm from America, I know English, I know Spanish, sign language, and Korean, proficient to advanced level, and then I knew German when I was a kid, and then I am currently learning Chinese. So today I will be mostly discussing Spanish, sign language, Korean, and Chinese, and mostly because all 4 of these are ones that I learned very, very differently. So we're gonna go over just all of the different ways I learn things. This is obviously not the only ways to learn languages, and I'll actually be talking about a lot of pros and cons of each of the ways that I learned, and then discussing what I think is the best way. So to begin, I will be talking about Spanish. Spanish is the one that I have known the longest. I started learning it when I was a kid in school. I learned it for about 9 years between elementary, middle, and high school. But like I said, I'm from America. We don't actually start language early enough at all. Most people start in 7th or 6th or even 8th or 9th grade, which I think is insane. I signed up for Spanish lessons, my parents signed me up for Spanish lessons after school, kind of like a Spanish language program, because I was so interested in it, and they definitely saw the values of being bilingual. And so I started when I was in 2nd grade. And then I went up until high school. I didn't actually get to take it all of the years of high school because I kind of passed out of it, but that is the time in which I learned Spanish. I will say Spanish I think is the one that has stuck with me the best, probably because I learned it as such a young kid. I definitely feel myself like, sometimes I'm like, oh my god, I feel like I can't speak Spanish anymore, and then I'll hear Spanish or listen to Spanish and I'll be like, no, I still have it. It's definitely not on my tongue anymore, I would say. I definitely have to think a little bit before I say something, especially after learning so many other languages after it, because the grammar for Spanish is very different from the grammar of Korean. And sometimes I will find myself, I open my mouth to speak Spanish and I speak a different language because it's not on my tongue anymore. That's the only way I can say it. But this is kind of the classic school learning. So, I mean, when I was a kid, I learned how to count, I learned the colors, I learned basically, as a tiny child, I learned tiny child things, and then as I got older, I learned more advanced things. This is probably the one I don't remember the grammar the best. I definitely mess up my grammar, but also I feel like I don't have to use really advanced grammar in just everyday conversation. So it's definitely the one I would say I know the vocabulary really well, and I can listen really well and read and write very well, but not speak as well. And that is definitely because I fell out of the practice of speaking Spanish. I never speak Spanish out loud anymore. I have a couple friends that I will text or type to in Spanish, but other than that, I really don't speak it, and I haven't spoken it since high school. Obviously, if you're watching this, you are probably a bit old to consider the school approach to learning a language of starting when you're a really young kid, but if you are a parent, definitely get your kids into language classes early as possible. There are definitely after school programs at a lot of schools, or there are separate schools. I know there are tons of Mandarin schools around where I live, and actually different places that I've lived, and there's also places like Kumon or Sylvan Learning Center and stuff that they will teach languages, and personally I think it is worth it. Again, Spanish is probably the one that has stuck with me the most, and I probably am the most confident in, even though I do sometimes feel a little bit behind in my speaking, but that is also totally on me because I stopped using it. So going from there, I learned sign language. Sign language is definitely the one that I think a lot of people think is the best way of learning, in the sense that I kind of got dropped into a situation that I needed to learn it. When I was 15, I worked at a camp for inclusive kids, so it was neurotypical kids as well as kids with special needs and disabilities, and I worked with a young boy who was autistic and deaf, and I had to learn sign language to be able to communicate with him. And I also wanted to learn it because there were a lot of kids who didn't communicate verbally, as well as just something I was very interested in. So this was definitely a situation of, I was dropped into a situation that I needed to learn it, and I kind of just had to teach myself as well as just learn from doing. This, I think, is what most people think is like the best way to learn a language, as in like just go to Spain to learn Spanish, go to China to learn Chinese. And the only thing I would say that's really frustrating about this is that I think other people kind of give up on you. I've actually had this conversation with quite a few people that, like, my friend, she went to Germany and she was like, I just wanted to practice my German, but the second I started speaking German to people, people would automatically start speaking English to me because they didn't want to deal with it. They didn't want to deal with having to talk to someone who's not fluent in the language. And I think that is definitely the biggest frustration of this type of learning, especially if you're an English native speaker, because most people will just give up on you and start speaking English because most people know English. So I think unless you're kind of dropped into a situation like mine, where it was kind of like I had to do this, it's a little bit frustrating because definitely other people give up on you a lot quicker than you are giving up on yourself. And also I definitely learned the language really, really fast, but I still really struggle sometimes with communicating in sign language because I did learn mostly from interacting with one person. So when someone else does something slightly different, especially with sign language, which is very, very interpretive and very, very different from person to person, it can be very, very difficult. So I'm not sure about other languages because that is the only language I kind of had to do that with, but it was a little bit frustrating when I left that situation and was trying to interact with other people who knew sign language. I was constantly like, wait, what'd you say? What? And like I knew how to say things I thought I knew how to say things, and I would do the sign and they'd be like, what are you doing? And especially because, again, sign language, a lot of people think of as the international language, but there are different forms of sign language, and I learned a combination of American and British, which is confusing. So it's one of those situations that I would say try to learn it, not just getting dropped into a situation, because after you're out of that situation, it is very difficult to keep up. And also, again, this was probably the one that I learned the quickest, but also lost the quickest. So the next one is Korean. Korean I took I started in high school. I started in my junior year of high school, and I took it until my junior year of college. So like 5 years. And this was textbook based. This was textbook based. I taught myself Korean when I was in high school because I had passed out of the Spanish classes, so I started learning Korean instead for my language, and it was really hard to teach yourself. Language is so hard to teach yourself, especially with one that isn't I didn't know how to make the sounds that was necessary for this. Sounds and phonetics is very difficult to communicate on a page, so it's very difficult to teach yourself, especially if it's a language that doesn't use your alphabet and doesn't use the same tones and word kind of thing, mouth usage. I don't know how to explain that. People who speak other languages know what I'm talking about, though. It's very hard to teach yourself that. So I was probably spent the 2 years in high school on beginner stuff, and then when I got to college, I entered into Korean classes. The only Korean classes available were intensive Korean classes. This I cannot recommend. I do not recommend intensive classes unless you are already very, very good at the language and kind of want more of a refresher, because Korean I am the least confident in. I'm quite confident in reading, I'm quite confident in listening, but when I open my mouth to speak Korean, I need to think for 10 minutes ahead of time because I am just so not confident in it. The problem with learning a language in intensive classes is simply that you're going really, really fast. In my classes at college, we learned about 500 to 700 vocabulary words a semester, which is 14 to 15 weeks, and about 40 to 50 grammar points, again, in 14 to 15 weeks. And that is impossible to keep up. It is so hard, and I look back on some of my earlier textbooks when I need like a refresher on something, and I am literally like, I don't even remember doing this. Definitely I loved being in a class again because I had a teacher to help me and a teacher to speak and for me to hear things, but also the teacher definitely just did not spend much time with individual people or on a subject for too long. We're basically going a lesson a day, and it was a lot. We had vocab quizzes every single day of class. We had grammar quizzes like every week or two, and it was a lot, and Korean is definitely the one that I think I'm just not confident in, because learning that much information, things get very, very muddled and very confused with each other. I'm very confident when I see things on a page and I can read them. I'm very confident in kind of translating from a page, but in my head, just like coming up with stuff on my own, I'm definitely not that great at. Because a lot of people do ask about Korean, I figured I would go over the textbooks that I used. So I use Integrated Korean. So these are the two edition 1 beginners books, and I went through both of these. I want to say these were the ones I went through in high school, and then I started like reviewing them during my college classes. I also have Intermediate 1 in this first edition, but then in college we had to start getting the intermediate, or the edition 2. So yeah, this is Intermediate 1 and this is Intermediate 2. So kind of going over what I did, because obviously you can see lots of different tabs. I think this one's a little bit more organized. So I would kind of tab the vocabulary and then tab the grammar points. And in these, we have basically, it follows a very easy to follow pattern. So you get a story, you get vocabulary, and then you get the grammar. So it's kind of like you practice your reading and interpreting kind of skills with the story, and it kind of follows the same characters throughout I think all of the books, and then you get the new vocabulary from that story, and then you get the grammar that you learned in that story. So the biggest problem I found with the intensive classes was that I didn't get enough time to fully grasp vocabulary and grammar before moving on. And I was a person who I would study every day for Korean, and I just simply could not get things down in time. And I would say I have very good memory. I am a person who usually when I read something, I can remember it for a very long time, and I'm usually very good at memorization. But Korean, it was so much kind of building on top of each other that I definitely got pretty lost each semester, about like halfway through the semester. The biggest thing I would say when using textbooks is to just go at your own pace. Hopefully, if you're learning on your own, that won't be a problem. And during school, if you're taking it in a school setting, just like try not to take intensive classes firstly, but also if you end up in a school setting, kind of work with your professor, ask questions, because that was another thing, was I was definitely nervous to just ask questions in class. I definitely was a bit shy and I wasn't confident in speaking, especially because most of the questions we'd have to ask them in Korean. And as a person who wasn't confident in speaking in Korean, it was really scary to ask any kind of question. So I would say talk to your professor, all of that, but if you're learning on your own, just go slowly. Just have your textbook, have a notebook beside you, make flashcards. I went through so many flashcards, but they were so helpful for retaining information, because I would just flip through them constantly. So that is how I use textbooks and how intensive classes went. So now I'm currently learning Chinese. Chinese has been almost easy to me, because I already knew a lot of Korean, and again, although I do struggle a little bit with Korean, the vocabulary I am pretty good at to an extent. And when hearing and reading it, I'm pretty good at it. It's harder for me to come up with it on the spot, but a lot of Korean comes from Chinese. So I have 2 Chinese textbooks. I really haven't delved into these too much because I have been trying to do an app. So I know a lot of people learn languages now from the internet, from apps and stuff. So I wanted to talk about this because I do not like Duolingo. I've tested out Duolingo for a couple of different languages because other people wanted to learn them. Like my friend Haley wanted to learn Korean, and I was like, let me check out Duolingo, let me see if it's any good, because I found that the Chinese one was not good. So I went through a couple of them. I think I tested Korean, Spanish, and Chinese, and I did not like them. I found Duolingo to just kind of, firstly, especially with the Chinese one, I was so lost because it would just like throw you into a lesson. Like the first lesson just throws you in and it doesn't translate anything. It's just like, here's this word and it goes with this word, and it doesn't actually give you a translation or anything. And it was really weird. And also like I learned numbers out of order, so I didn't know how to count, and I was like, what is this? And I found the same was true for Korean and Spanish. Was it just kind of threw you in to really, really random vocabulary and grammar points, in my opinion. It also didn't explain grammar points. It was just vocabulary, and it also was not translating everything. And I found that really, really difficult to use. So I wanted to try out an app for Chinese just because, again, kind of like I said, learning a language that you don't know how to use the, like, say it, basically, especially with Chinese that has tones and a completely different like way of talking than English. I knew I wanted to have something that I could actually hear. So I decided to try a different app. It's called Chinese Learn, and it's specifically for Chinese, and I personally found this way more helpful than Duolingo. Duolingo, again, I know a lot of people love Duolingo, but I found other apps to just be way better for actually learning. The problem I find with apps is that people treat it almost like a game. People just get through it as quickly as possible and just like treat it as a game to get things correctly, and they don't actually retain anything. My biggest tips when learning from an app is to, firstly, also have a notebook, also have stuff physically. Like I do have a notebook, it's upstairs, I'm not gonna go get it, but I do have a notebook that I've been writing down all of my new vocabulary into the notebook, so it is still physical. And also to not treat it as a game. Use every single thing at your disposal in that app. Listen to everything a couple of times. Play things over again. So the way I've been doing it is I will do a lesson a day, or like a part of a lesson. There's like lessons, and then it's like 3 things within that lesson on this app, and I'll do one of those a day, but then go back and do the reviews for all of the lessons I have already done. This is to kind of get everything in your head better and to make you really retain things, because again, I think the biggest thing with apps is people treat it as, let me just get this done for the day, let me get my streak for the day, and they don't actually retain anything, because you're treating it as a game and just kind of like a goal to get to. If you are a person who wants to use an app, because obviously apps are a lot easier to use than like sitting down with a textbook and like a notebook and like actually learning like from school, because a lot of us don't want to do that anymore. Using an app can be great, but you have to use it correctly. Again, I would suggest a lesson or 2 a day, and then go back and do every single lesson review before the one that you just did, because again, the biggest thing with Korean was that in these intensive classes I wasn't fully retaining the stuff from the lessons before. So on the app, I've been trying really hard to make sure that I fully retain every single vocabulary and grammar point that I learned previously, so that when I continue, it is easier for me. Also with the app, make sure that you are speaking it out loud. I feel like, again, with the app, it's very easy to play it like as a game and just like click, click, yep, this, and like done kind of thing. It doesn't really make you actually practice it. So when you are doing it, don't like do it in public. Take a half hour in the comfort of your own home and say everything out loud. Everything that the app says, say it back to the app. It's not gonna get you any points on this game, but it will help you so much to retain the information. I have been learning Chinese. I've actually picked up Chinese 3 separate times. I picked it up in my freshman year, picked it up last fall, and now I'm picking it up again. And I would say from those 3 times and just like kind of retaining everything, and now really knowing how to use an app to study, I have definitely picked it up pretty quick. Again, it is definitely, I know quite a bit of stuff from Korean because quite a few words are very similar. But also, I must suggest, as much as some people say that this doesn't work, I highly suggest listening to music and watching shows in the language you are trying to learn. So obviously a lot of people do this for Korean because a lot of people are into K-pop and K-dramas, and I must say it is very helpful if you use it correctly. If you're just listening to Blackpink, it doesn't help. You need to play it in your car and try to actually sing along and actually sing it correctly. Or actually be listening, actively listen to it and pick out words that you know. One of the most exciting things ever was when I was in, I think, my 2nd semester of intensive Korean, the song BTS's, oh my god, what's it called? Spring Day? I want to say Spring Day. It came out and all of us came back and we're like, we could translate almost the entire song. And it was the most exciting thing ever because we were listening to it and we were like, oh my god, I know these words, I know this grammar. And it is so exciting when you're actively listening to a K-pop song and you can actually hear words and know what they mean. It is so exciting. So use K-pop or K-dramas or Spanish dramas or anything like that to your advantage, but do it actively. Do not just sit back passively and take in the English subtitles. Turn off the subtitles and try to actually listen and actually understand. I personally, with Chinese, I have been following Wave, the C-pop group from NCT, and I literally have been learning Chinese for a couple of days this time around, and I could already pick out things from what they were saying. Again, obviously, I have done it a couple other times in the past, but I could already pick out things that they were saying and kind of was able to put things together. I also loved Idol Producer. I don't know how many people are still here from Idol Producer, but I made a lot of videos about that. And just like rewatching little clips from that and watching that show definitely made me able to hear Chinese a little bit better. Getting familiar with the language and hearing it is extremely helpful because so many people can't tell the difference between Korean, Chinese, and Japanese. And I'm sitting here like, how can you not tell? It's so different. It's so different. But obviously they haven't heard it that much. So getting familiar with how a language sounds is incredibly important. So again, listen to that K-pop, watch those C-dramas, watch those Spanish dramas like on TV. I love Spanish soap operas. It's so funny. But turn off subtitles after you feel confident with it. Yeah, that's what I'm currently doing for Chinese. I'm learning on the app and I am watching C-pop stuff, which is a lot of fun. Also, it's got me back into C-pop because I definitely fell off the train a little bit after Idol Producer. So those are all of the different ways that I learned languages. In school from childhood, dropped into the situation, intensive school learning on my own with an app. My favorite way so far and the way that I think has worked the best for me is actually the app. I don't know why I have to say this, but I'm not being sponsored by any language learning apps. So I know some people probably are, but I'm not. But my favorite way so far has been the app, except for maybe my childhood learning. I don't really remember it, if I'm completely honest. But with stuff that I've done recently, it's definitely been the app because I go at my own pace. I can review. I'm not like hitting deadlines. I don't have tests to worry about. I don't have quizzes to worry about. It's a lot more chill. but also to use the app, you definitely have to be a self-motivated and dedicated person. I don't think like the average person can really learn a language using an app unless you are really freaking dedicated to it. Other people who are a little bit less dedicated or a little bit less motivated, which there's nothing wrong with, learning a language is hard, would probably find the school setting or again kind of dropped into a situation a lot easier because it's forcing you to learn the language. But for people who are excited to learn a language and are motivated and dedicated to learning, then I probably would suggest the app and the self-driven studying. Because for me, it really works a lot better. And because again, I can go at my own pace, which I think has been the biggest problem with learning languages for me in the past, is I don't get to set my own pace when I'm at school. So yeah, I hope all of you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely leave down below in the comments what languages do you guys know? How did you learn them? Do you agree with any of my tips? Do you agree with any of the things that I struggled with? Or if you didn't struggle, like if you were in intensive Korean classes and you didn't struggle, definitely give tips down below on how to keep up with all of that. Anyways, I love y'all and I'll see y'all soon. Bye!